Hello everyone, this is Veysel from Johnson Labs. I'm the principal data scientist and machine learning engineer at Johnson Labs. Today I'm going to cover the most important topics that we have been working at Johnson Labs for the last few years. And I wanted to summarize everything in a one single talk, which I titled as Modular Approach to Solve Problems at Scale in Healthcare NLP. So I hope you enjoy. So as you know, we are facing some challenges actually right now in the healthcare domain. Right now, like due to the possibilities and then the research in healthcare AI domain, especially in the all deep learning domain, actually. Every day we are seeing new models, new state of the art benchmarks, and new AI solutions that would help all the businesses solve their problem at scale. But when it comes to healthcare practitioners, usually we try to do some like we try to make some unacceptable trade-offs between delivering the state-of-the-art accuracy versus generalizing over unseen data points versus preventing the sharing of personal data or intellectual property. Which means that for the sake of the state-of-the-art accuracy or for the sake of preventing the sensitive data, we usually we usually are not able to use the state-of-the-art models in our platforms if we are trying to solve some um, uh, problems in the healthcare. So in Spark NLP, we try to build a one platform as an end-to-end platform to solve these issues in even with no internet connection, with no other dependencies other than the Spark itself. And then we also try to make sure that the code, the pipeline that you write to parse one single text file should also work over a cluster for 1 million records or more than that, actually. So right now, Spark NLP for Healthcare Library, as you know, this is our licensed library developed by John Snow Labs, which is extending everything from the open source library. So Spark NLP for Healthcare aims to bridge this gap that I mentioned in the previous slide by providing an accurate, which is always assuring state-of-the-art results by embracing the latest research in academia, and scalable solutions, which is sitting on top of Apache Spark itself. This is the only NLP library in Spark, as you know. Like a private means private, you can run this library in your air gap or high compliant environment without worrying about any data leakage or losing your or exposing your sensitive data to internet. And tunable, which means that all the model that we have in Spark NLP for healthcare can be extended and can be tuned with your own data, which is highly flexible in terms of transfer learning. And modular, which I am going to cover today. Modular means that, like, in order to build a giant code block, code base that that you need to swap the data, use different algorithms, import other libraries, etc. You don't need to worry about doing this in your like a highly restricted environment when you are working with the sensitive data. You just can play with Spark NLP itself by plugging and playing with certain models over the shelf, which I'm going to show how you can do this today. So this software library, as you know, for the last 3 years, is the most widely used NLP library in healthcare industry and helps healthcare and pharma organization build longitudinal patient records across different visits and clinical notes and knowledge graphs on a real-world EHR data. So let's see how we do this, how to solve certain problems, and some benchmark, of course. So it's very clear, actually, that the systems built in hospitals or pharma or the healthcare provider-related businesses, the systems used to generate all these clinical notes are designed for efficient operations, because the hospitals, like the healthcare professionals, needs to move fast, handle things in the most professional way that they can do, because this is like the lives are at stake, as you know. But the systems used to generate all these nodes are for operations, not for organizing the data efficiently, that you can use that data for the in your workflows to solve certain problems. Right now, the hospitals or pharma companies are sitting on a jam of huge pile of data, which are most of the time in text format, and usually it's hard to extract insights from these resource at scale. So what we do here is we are using unstructured, like the goal is taking the unstructured EHR data and then converting this text data into a tabular or graph, right? So that we can query against, like to get some answer for our questions. We can query by using our conventional programming languages, as you know. And then the next step would be putting all these clinical facts on a timeline, right? If you can put these clinical facts on a timeline, you can understand when, what happened, when, and why, right? So that's why we are trying to use AI and NLP, let's say NLP, to answer the questions using the text data by using this data in our downstream pipelines by using all these pre-trained models or training from scratch if needed, of course, so that we would be able to answer certain questions like what are the opportunities to intervene, what are the risks, what is the next body part that the metastasis would spread, right? If you can leverage all this information from text data by using the latest state of the art research, you will have a chance to convert your garbage data into a gem that you can power all your workflow. So in Spark NLP, we have certain models to accomplish this. Like everything starts with clinical NER models, because the NER models is the minimal, meaningful chunks of any text. So that's why it is the gateway to the understanding actually. So I'm saying, when I'm saying understanding, of course, I'm using air quotes here. That we are. I'm not going to say that we are trying to, like, NLP is able to understand human language, because it's whole another topic that we shouldn't cover. I will not cover today. But right now, in this modular approach that I'm going to explain today, NER is the entry point for all the rest of the downstream models that is going to be used to process that data. So NER extract the meaningful information like a dosage, like a disorder, like a clinical findings given a text, and then outputs this entity as an input for the rest of the modules that would accomplish other tasks like entity linking. So if you are going to find the SNOMED code of a clinical finding, you need to find that clinical finding at first and then send to SNOMED resolver, and then or if you want to get the Arixidon code for a dosage or a drug, you need to find the drug and then the dosage and then join them together and then send to resolver, right? So NER needs that. So we need NER to produce that chunk, that meaningful phrase, to feed all the other modules, like an assertion status, like finding the negativity scope, the identification, like masking or obfuscating the sensitive data. Not just sensitive data, maybe you are going to de-identify or mask or obfuscate the drug names that you are working on, and or the city names or the patient names, or just some certain terms that you want to mask if it's sensitive, right? You need NER over there to find that phrase, and then the other modules will all fed by NER. So doing this in one single library is highly challenging, right? That's why people are using many other libraries by importing. And if you are working with the small data, it's not a big deal, right? So you can just use 10 different libraries to accomplish this by using the same text in 10 different libraries. Like if you want to use NER from library A, and then if you like the relation extraction from library B, you can use your one sentence as an input in all these models. But we are talking about the big data here. So if you are going to build a pipeline to process your large amount of text data, electronic health records, let's say, you would probably end up with I remember talking to some people that they are dealing with 1.5 million records per night. So they need to process and then update their dashboards over the, like, by the month, by the morning. So which means that they don't have a chance to babysit this process or use many different libraries without worrying about exposing their sensitive data, also assuring the state of the art results, right? So that's why I would like to give you an example, like a simple example. So assume that we have this sentence, like a 28-year-old female with a history of type 2 diabetes mellitus, etc. So the goal here, given this text, we can extract many different attributes from this text, right? Because the goal is how to use this data for the downstream text, or how to use this data to fill up some forms or to build some graphs so that we can query, or we can use these features as an input to our other machine learning models, right? So as you can see, we need one NER or multiple NER models to extract age, gender, given the problem. Of course, some problems do not need to extract age or gender, but let's say that we have a one general NER model to extract all these attributes that would be helpful for me to use as a feature. So let's say we have one NER model to extract age. By the way, we already have more than 50 different NER models to extract all these, and one giant NER model to extract all of them, like more than 80 at a time. Anyway, so so we detected age and gender. Now let's find this clinical finding. When you find this clinical finding, like type 2 diabetes mellitus, you also need some, like most of the time, SNOMED code, ICD-10 codes, and UMLS code. So if this would be a drug entity, as you can see here, 2 milligram metformin, you would also need RX norm and NDC codes. So if this would be a procedure, let's say that CT abdomen, you would also need CPT code, right? If you are going to formalize these phrases and then fill up some tables for reimbursement purposes or billing purposes, or just normalizing, right? To get rid of the typos, etc. So you would need all these entities and then feed these entities to the other downstream tasks, let's say like this, right? So you would need all these boxes to be able to solve this problem, like to able to extract all these entities, you would need NER, and then extract the SNOMED and ICD code, you need ICD resolver, SNOMED resolver, UMLS resolver. For the drugs, you need a risk norm resolver. You also need to find the relationship between the entities so that you can send 2 milligram and metformin, right? 2 milligram and metformin. If they are related, you can create a one chunk on the fly and then send to RX norm, because metformin 2 milligram is different than metformin 100 milligram in terms of RX norm and NDC. So by the way, you would also probably want to calculate some risk scores like CMS risk score or HHS risk score, which are all fed by these attributes. For example, for the CMS, you wouldn't need, right, drug information, right? But you would only need ICD-10, gender, and age, and some disability status. For the other risk adjustment score, you would also need NDC code from the drug prescribed to patient. So that's why you need to have a pipeline if you are going to, handle this process at a scale. If you are a healthcare facility and you have a huge amount of data, and you would need huge amount of time and money to handle this in a most efficient way, right? So that's why there are many different libraries that are claiming to handle this problem by using different resolvers. There are also cloud providers, which I'm going to share some benchmark today as well, like Azure, GCP, AWS, Medical Component. They are all pay-as-you-go solutions that they are also extracting all these attributes, some of them, like not one of them. There is no one single cloud provider that could provide everything that you see on the screen. So that's why in Spark NLP, we treat this problem as like a downstream pipeline so that it could scale over the cluster. So how we do this? So at first, we feed our text to basic text processing pipeline, which is usually, like the first step is sentence splitting. We need to detect the sentence boundaries, which is also another deep learning model that we trained. For the healthcare data, we need to tokenize the sentence and then extract the BERT or GLOW or ELMO embeddings given the type of the algorithms that we use in our pipeline. We would also need SBERT, like a sentence BERT, Siamese BERT architectures to extract, to average, to get the average BERT embeddings, contextual BERT embeddings of a token, of a sentence, of a sentence or a document. So what we do is, instead of handling this in one by one, so we feed the text once to our like to sentence splitter, like a row by row, right? And then the output of this fed to NER, and the NER feeds rest of the pipeline. So, for example, assertion status needs named entities, right, to find the negativity scope, like absent or present. It also needs to know the embeddings of the token that lives in the chunk. So it also needs to communicate with this pipeline. So you can handle this end-to-end architecture in one single pipeline in Spark NLP without worrying about moving your data between different pipelines, because the more you swap the data between the pipelines, you need to move it in the memory, which is highly inefficient if you are dealing with distributed computing or big data. So, for example, relation extraction needs an input from NER as well as the embeddings annotator. So we just play with this, like all these arrows represent input and output columns in the pipeline. And then you send the output of NER and embeddings to the resolver. You can either extract, like resolve each chunk into a different resolver, like a SNOMED code, UMLS. You can run it again and again. Sometimes it's inefficient, right? If you can map, we also have a mapper, like convert SNOMED to UMLS, convert SNOMED to ICD, because these are all expensive operations. For the resolver to get a state of the art accuracy, we use sentence BERT, by the way. That's why it's a little bit expensive operation. That's why we sometimes just resolve to one of them, like ICD or SNOMED. And then if the problem allows us, we use mapper to convert from SNOMED to ICD. Or we have some router annotators that collect everything at once from SBERT. Then you have the embeddings for everything in your pipeline, and then you can feed these results, which, because the most expensive part is the BERT, right? That sentence embeddings collection part, that you feed the output of SBERT to this resolver, which are kind of cheap operations, because resolving is a clustering problem. As long as you have a strong contextual embeddings, it's a manageable problem. So in Spark NLP, how we do this, we build such a pipeline that we control with an input and output column. As you can see on the right-hand side, every annotator has an input and an output column that is going to help you to build your pipeline in a most flexible way, so that you can connect the first component with the fifth component with the 10th, without breaking your pipeline into multiple partitions. Okay, and then at the end of the pipeline, you would end up with all the information already collected from all these annotators. You can get rid of them, or just use the last one. So in Spark NLP, as I said, we have 48 different clinical NER models that are already pre-trained on certain data sets. Some of them are in-house data sets, some of them are PubMed data sets, some of them are some well-known benchmark data sets that clinical NLP researchers usually release. We are also releasing this kind of data sets. So we name it, as you can see on the slide. We also have the BERT version of the same NER models. Our flagship architecture for NER is called BiLSTM CNNChar. Okay, so you can use any embeddings here. You can use Glow embeddings, you can use BERT, Elmo, BioBERT. So okay, so if you have a latency issue, if you want a faster inference, if you want to train faster, of course you may want to use Glow, which is usually, that's why we prefer using Glow clinical embeddings for our clinical NER models, because most of the time you would need multiple NER to accomplish what you need. Not one single NER would help you to do to solve your issues. So you may want to merge multiple NER. So if you are going to use BERT architecture, it's highly expensive. And we also have the BERT for token classification in NER model, which we added like a few weeks ago. So we just trained 5 models so far, but it is exactly the same architecture that the BERT itself used. So it is not, it's, we just converted the checkpoints. But for the clinical NER and BioBERT NER model, these are all our own architecture. So if you don't know how to resolve all these entities from your NER, like all these NER, if you don't know which one to use, right, which is usually the case, we created one pre-trained pipeline that would allow you to explore which NER would work best for your use case. You can just feed one text and then load this NER profiling clinical model from S3. And as you can see on the screen, you can just use it in one liner, and then you will end up with all the entities from each NER one by one. You may also want to end up with this kind of visualization by using Neo4j with the output of Spark NLP. So as long as you have the NERs, assertions, resolvers, and relation extractions from the output of your pipeline, you can create one single table in a format that Neo4j or any graph product can process, right? And then when you fit this, you will be able to create nodes for each unique entities, and now you can query this graph, like give me the patient who are accommodating for the last 3 years or who are also 18 years old, right? You can ask these kind of questions in a graph, and then using its own SQL language, you can end up with your results that is already parsed by Spark NLP. So another nice addition in the last few months to our library was Resolver, because Resolver is a hard problem. Like how to find ICD-10 or SNOMED code, because there are millions of codes out there, and people are trained for this. Like there is a human coder job, right? People are trained, and then they are extracting, they are finding the right code given the condition by reading entire document sometimes. So, and there are some regulations for this. So to make it faster and at scale, so we are using SBERT, which is already fine-tuned on our in-house data sets, which is labeled data set, by the way, because SBERT needs labeled data set to train, to fine-tune. And then we are also using weighted sentence chunk embeddings, so that we just don't let the model see the chunk, because the chunk embeddings already has the entire sentence context, right, due to the BERT architecture. We also average it so that you don't need to build the chunk on the fly to get most informative resolution. Like instead of sending CT and abdomen entities to end up with CT abdomen code from CPT, you can just send CT, as you can see at the bottom, and then since it's already understand the abdomen from the context, it will end up with the most informative code from CPT. So let's talk about some benchmarks. When do you want to use BERT versus GLOW, like a lightweight GLOW versus memory intensive but most accurate BERT architectures? So we did some experiments. As I said before, we have 3 different architectures in Spark NLP NER models, like embeddings, clinical, BioBERT, and BERT for token classification. So according to the test we run on 5 different data sets, as you can see, GLOW is not doing that bad actually. It's almost doing as good as the BioBERT and BERT for token classification. So at the right-hand side column, it's the state-of-the-art results, which is also coming from Spark NLP, by the way. As you can see, GLOW embeddings are 30% faster during training compared to BERT embeddings, our experiments show, and more than 5 times faster during inference, which is quite important, by the way, because if you are going to use multiple NER models in your pipeline, which is usually the case, you don't want to block by any process, right? That's why using GLOW without sacrificing too much on accuracy, you can end up with 5 times faster inference. We recently released an end-to-end adverse drug reactions models, which is the combination of classification, name identity recognition, and relation extraction. So what we do here is we feed the text and then try to find if this text is related to adverse drug event. The next step, if this is adverse drug related sentence, is there any adverse drug entities or drug entities mentioned over there? and which one of them are related to each other, right? As you can see on the examples, you might find some ADE entity like a drowsiness, right? And then find the other entity, which is drug, and then you can see if there is a relationship between. Sometimes in the social media, people started to, exchange this kind of information. Some drugs may not be related to the adverse event that is mentioned in the same sentence. That's why relation extraction is highly important. Then we wrote a paper about this and then submitted to the latest conference, which is under review, by the way, AAAI conference. So over there, we end up with these accuracies in the adverse track event pipeline. So for NER, we already have the state of the art accuracy, which is beating all the other published scores in on 3 different data sets. And for classification, there are 2 popular data sets, which we already claim the top scores right now. And for the relation extraction, we also augment, like enrich the base relation extraction data set, and we also hit the state of the art results. So, and the last one is the resolvers. For the resolvers, we compared our ICD-10 resolver with Microsoft, AWS, and GCP resolvers, and John Snow Labs ICD-10 resolver. When compared the top 5 results within the 200 clinical concept, we are right now the leading resolver in the industry right now. Thank you.